Italy, late autumn 1944. The sky was gray, the earth blackened, and the smell of burnt oil hung like a ghost over the Allied airstrip at Cerignola. A P-51 Mustang lay nose first in the mud, its propeller twisted into a corkscrew, its belly torn open like a gutted fish. Steam hissed from the shattered radiator, curling up into the cold morning air. Men stood around it shaking their heads. "She's done," one mechanic muttered. "Might as well strip her for parts." But not everyone agreed. From behind the hangar came a squat man in grease-stained coveralls, dragging a crate of tools that clattered across the tarmac. Sergeant Raymond Cutter, the one they called Junkyard Prophet. He spat out a cigarette, squinted at the wreck, and ran a hand over the bullet holes. "You boys ever see a horse that just needed new shoes?" "Ray," said one of the crew chiefs. "That plane's dead. She crashed at 200 miles an hour. Pilot's lucky to be breathing." Cutter crouched by the fuselage, wiping mud from the Mustang's nose art. Miss Betty Lou. Beneath the grime, the name still gleamed in faded red. "Then we're bringing her back." The man laughed. "With what? Prayers and spare parts? Command already marked her for scrap." Cutter stood, eyes hard. "Scrap is just the start. You give me 3 days, I'll give you a ghost with wings." He wasn't joking. That night, as bombers droned overhead and tracer fire stitched across the distant horizon, Cutter worked by lantern light beside the wreck. The plane looked hopeless. One wing sheared, engine cracked, hydraulic lines torn to ribbons. But Cutter saw something the manuals didn't. The frame was bent but not broken, the soul intact. He scavenged through the base's junk pile. Busted air filters, warped flaps, half a P-47 carburetor, and a radiator fan from a wrecked B-25. "Pieces don't care where they come from," he muttered, "long as they fit the fight." By dawn, he had drawn up a plan on the back of a ration box, a blueprint born from madness and necessity. The pilot, Captain Harlan, limped up on crutches. "You can't be serious," he said. "That thing's a coffin with wings." Cutter grinned through the dirt. "Then I'll build you the fastest coffin in Italy." Harlan stared at him for a moment, then shook his head. "You've lost it." Cutter pointed at the horizon where the rumble of German fighters echoed faintly. "They've got jets now. You want to live? We either build something faster, or we die pretty." He turned back to the wreck and swung a hammer, sparks flying. By the time the sun broke over the Apennines, the field was alive with the rhythm of tools, hammers striking, wrenches clanking, and men whispering that the crazy Iowa mechanic was trying to resurrect the dead. In a war defined by perfection from factories, Cutter was about to prove that genius could come from junk. The Mustang would fly again. But when it did, it wouldn't just return to the sky. It would break it. The next morning, word spread across the 332nd's airfield like wildfire. Cutter was trying to bring a dead Mustang back to life. By noon, half the ground crew had gathered around Hangar 3, betting cigarettes on how long it would take before the whole thing exploded. Cutter ignored them. His sleeves were rolled up, his knuckles bleeding, his jaw clenched around a half-burned cigarette. He wasn't fixing a plane. He was waging war against regulation itself. According to every field manual, that P-51 was finished. Crumpled wings, scrap. Fractured engine block, scrap. Twisted fuselage, scrap. The Army's doctrine was clear. If it can't be rebuilt to spec, it can't fly. But Cutter didn't care about doctrine. He knew machines like some men knew prayer. To him, the difference between wrecked and ready wasn't in the manual. It was in the mechanic. "All you gotta do," he told one skeptic, "is listen close enough. They tell you what they need." "You're insane," said Corporal Mason, one of the younger crewmen. "That radiator's shot, the oil pressure's gone, and Command said—" Cutter cut him off. "Command's never fixed a carburetor in a sandstorm, have they? Machines don't care about paperwork." He pointed toward the junkyard behind the hangar, a graveyard of twisted wings, cracked cowls, and bent landing gear. "Everything they threw away once worked, so we're going to teach it how again." By evening, the squadron commander, Major Holloway, showed up, hat tilted, clipboard under his arm, unimpressed. "Sergeant Cutter," he said flatly, "you're out of your damn mind." "Maybe," Cutter replied, "but my madness still runs on high octane." Holloway leaned in. "You're using scavenged parts from 3 different aircraft?" "4 if you count the B-25 cooler. Fits perfect, like it was meant to." The Major's jaw tightened. "You're risking lives. That plane's structure isn't rated for what you're doing." Cutter stood up, wiping sweat and oil across his face. "Sir, every part of this plane has already survived hell. It's tougher now than when it rolled out of the factory." Holloway stared at him, then sighed. "Fine. You've got 72 hours, but when it blows up, I'm writing the report myself." Cutter grinned. "Then I'll make sure it's worth reading." As the Major walked away, Mason whispered, "You really think you can do this?" Cutter looked at the wreck, now stripped to its bones. "They build planes to be perfect. I build them to forgive." He started sketching on a scrap of aluminum with a screwdriver. Airflow paths, fuel lines, a hybrid intake he'd only seen once before in a bomber manual. Overhead, a formation of Mustangs roared past, engines singing in harmony. Cutter didn't look up. "You hear that?" he asked. "That's how she's supposed to sound, and when I'm done, she'll sing louder." For the next 2 nights, the hangar lights burned through curfew. Every clang of metal was an act of rebellion, every spark a middle finger to military logic. The men watching stopped laughing. They started helping. By the 3rd night, the wreck was no longer a wreck. It was something new, patched with raw courage and steel that didn't match, a mosaic of broken parts reborn into one living thing. One mechanic muttered under his breath, "If this bird flies, I'm quitting science." Cutter heard him and smiled. "Don't quit it, kid," he said without looking up. "Just stop worshiping it." Before the war, Ray Cutter wasn't supposed to be anywhere near an airplane. He was supposed to be fixing tractors. He grew up outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Flat fields, endless sky, and engines older than the men driving them. His father ran a farm, his mother ran everything else. From the time he could walk, Ray was tightening bolts on broken plows and hammering life back into dying machines. He didn't learn from books. He learned by sound. The way a sputter changed pitch right before a belt snapped. The way a carburetor coughed when it was choking on its own air. He used to say, "Engines are like horses. They don't talk, but they damn sure complain." When the Depression hit, Cutter started building things from scrap. A hay baler from 2 truck axles, a generator from a Ford engine, even a working motorcycle out of a washing machine motor. By 17, he was known across the county as the Junkyard Kid, the one who could make anything run on nothing. So when the Army Air Forces came calling in 1942, Cutter didn't hesitate. He wasn't looking for glory. He just wanted a bigger engine to fight with. At basic training, the instructors couldn't stand him. He questioned everything from torque specifications to the efficiency of their tools. One sergeant barked, "You don't follow the manual, you'll kill someone." Cutter just smirked. "Sir, the manual's written by someone who never had to fix anything that mattered." His mechanical scores were off the charts, but his discipline record was a mess. Citations for unauthorized modifications, excessive field testing, and experimental tinkering. The Air Corps didn't know whether to promote him or court-martial him. They shipped him to Italy with the 332nd Fighter Group, figuring the war would either break him or make him too tired to argue. But in Italy, Cutter found his purpose. While other mechanics stuck to orders, Cutter listened to his pilots. "What's she doing up there?" he'd ask. "Where's she stalling? Where's she sluggish?" Then he'd fix it, not by the book, but by instinct. He'd sandblast dents in the leading edge by hand, patch radiator leaks with crushed aspirin and resin, and tune carburetors by ear until the engine purred like it wanted to bite someone. The pilots started calling him the Junkyard Engineer. Cutter didn't care about rank or reputation. He cared about results. And his planes, the ones he touched, came back when others didn't. One pilot swore his P-51 flew like it could smell the wind. Another said Cutter's engines sounded meaner, like they wanted revenge. To Cutter, every plane was alive. The manuals called them machines. He called them souls built from metal. That belief became his creed. If it breathes, it flies. If it flies, it fights. And now, standing over the shattered Mustang in Hangar 3, Cutter wasn't trying to break a rule. He was trying to prove a truth. That man and machine were more alike than anyone in command dared admit. Both could survive anything if someone cared enough to rebuild them. War is supposed to be about efficiency, about logistics, production, and supply lines feeding the front. But by 1944, the American air war in Italy had become a numbers game with a fatal flaw. Every week, hundreds of fighters limped home full of holes, leaking oil, landing gear collapsing on impact. The ones that didn't crash were written off, labeled beyond repair, stripped, and left to rot behind the hangars. The paperwork called it logistical necessity. Cutter called it criminal waste. He'd seen it too many times. A plane would take one bullet through the radiator, blow a tire, or lose a flap on landing, and the engineers would tag it for scrap. Not worth the man-hours, they'd say. Cutter would run his hand over the bullet holes, listening to the wind whisper through them, and mutter, "She's not dead. She's just waiting on a second chance." He wasn't wrong. The numbers told a grim story. Across the Mediterranean theater, the U.S. lost one aircraft for every 60 sorties. 40% of those losses had nothing to do with enemy action. They were mechanical: cooling failures, oil leaks, landing collapses, or bad engines. By the end of '44, Allied air depots in Italy had written off over 5,000 fighters as non-repairable. Each one cost more than $50,000, the equivalent of nearly $900,000 today, and replacements, weeks away, often longer. The war machine could build faster than it could deliver. To Cutter, the math didn't add up. If he could make one dead plane fly again, that was $50,000 worth of firepower saved. A single rebuild could escort bombers, defend convoys, save lives. But command didn't care about a mechanic's math. They cared about the manual. And the manual said anything below factory tolerance was a liability. Cutter disagreed. War doesn't wait for tolerances, he'd say. It runs on what's left. So he did his own math. He calculated thrust loss from bullet holes, drag coefficients from cracked panels, airflow variance from warped wingtips, not with a calculator, but with instinct and dirt. He once told a young mechanic, "You know what the difference is between a wreck and a weapon? About 48 hours and a bad idea." Behind his sarcasm was something more, a quiet fury at how easily the system gave up on things. He'd watched too many planes die because someone behind a desk said they weren't worth saving. And in a war that demanded perfection, Cutter found holiness in imperfection. Every scar, every dent, every crooked weld was proof that machines could endure, that humans could too. So when the base commander ordered Miss Betty Lou to be stripped for parts, Cutter just smiled and nodded. Then he waited until the paperwork cleared, rolled her into the hangar at night, and locked the doors. He wasn't stealing a plane. He was stealing a chance. Out of waste, he would build speed. Out of ruin, he would build revenge. And when the math of war said scrap, he'd answer with something louder, the scream of an engine that refused to die. Night fell over the airfield like a black curtain, and the hum of generators faded into silence. That's when Cutter went to work. The wreck of Miss Betty Lou sat in the center of Hangar 3. Half her right wing torn open, radiator punctured, oil pooling beneath the engine like blood. Her propeller hung limp, twisted as if she'd punched the ground and lost. To any other mechanic, She was a corpse. To Cutter, she was still breathing, just faintly. He lit a cigarette, pulled a dented thermos of coffee from his pocket, and said to himself, "All right, sweetheart. You and me, no manuals, no orders. Just faith." First came the frame. Cutter scavenged parts from 3 other Mustangs. One shot through the fuselage, another wrecked in a landing accident, and a third whose engine had seized midair. He picked through them like a surgeon in a junkyard, unbolting ribs, filing edges, and whispering, "You'll fit." He grafted a wing spar from one plane, reinforced the skin with a patch of aluminum stripped from an old B-24 bomber. He rethreaded hydraulic lines with copper wire, and when he ran out of couplings, cut a piece from his own wrench to make a new one. For the radiator, he found a cracked core from a British Spitfire and sealed it with chewing gum, solder, and a prayer. Mason, his young assistant, stared in disbelief. "You're mixing British parts with an American fighter," he said. "Yeah," Cutter muttered. "But the Germans don't check passports." By the second night, his hands were blistered raw. He'd been awake nearly 40 hours. Every bolt was tightened by feel, every weld tested by sound. The hangar smelled like burnt oil and adrenaline. At dawn, Major Holloway returned. He stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, expecting to see a heap of metal. Instead, he saw something else. A ghost reborn. "Christ, Cutter," he whispered. "You actually did it." The Mustang's frame gleamed beneath the hangar lights. Its patched wing shimmered unevenly. Different metals, mismatched colors, a Frankenstein of flight. Cutter had scrawled "second chances" in chalk on the nose. "Don't touch her yet," Cutter said. "She's still remembering who she is." Holloway walked around the plane, running a hand across the patchwork skin. "You know this is illegal as hell." "Then I'll go to hell flying," Cutter replied. By mid-morning, they rolled her out onto the runway. The ground crew stopped what they were doing. Some crossed their arms, others smirked. Nobody believed she'd lift. Cutter climbed into the cockpit, still in his grease-stained overalls. Mason leaned close and whispered, "Sir, the gauges might be off." "I don't need gauges," Cutter said. "I've got ears." The propeller spun once, twice, then roared to life with a cough that shook the ground. The patched radiator held. The hybrid engine whined like a beast with a new heart. Cutter grinned, throttled forward, and the P-51 rolled down the runway, wobbling once, twice, before the wheels left the earth. She climbed. Every man below stared, mouths open, as the scrap metal Mustang clawed skyward, faster than any of them thought possible. Cutter's radio crackled. "Ground to Hangar 3, you're not cleared for takeoff." He laughed, didn't ask for it. At 10,000 feet, he leveled out, the engine smooth as silk. He tapped the gauge cluster, pressure steady, temp holding. For a moment, the world below disappeared, and he was alone with the machine he'd resurrected. "See?" he whispered. "Told you we weren't done." When he landed, Holloway was waiting, jaw tight, clipboard trembling. "Congratulations," he said. "You've just violated 27 maintenance regulations." Cutter smiled, stepping down from the cockpit. "Good thing I stopped counting at 26. Behind them, second chances cooled in the sun, ticking softly. Proof that madness and genius were often just one bolt apart. The next morning, second chances wasn't supposed to exist. But the base couldn't stop talking about her. Word spread fast. The Junkyard Mustang had flown, and not just flown. She'd climbed like a rocket. Cutter's illegal rebuild had broken every expectation, and now pilots were lining up to see if the rumors were true. Major Holloway tried to bury the incident. He ordered the flight log destroyed, told Cutter to keep that thing grounded before Washington finds out. But war has a way of rewarding disobedience. 2 days later, a reconnaissance mission came up short of aircraft. Cutter's patched P-51 was the only one serviceable. The commander hesitated. That thing's not cleared for combat, Holloway grunted. Neither was Courage. Captain Joe Morales, a veteran pilot with a death wish and a grin, volunteered to fly her. Cutter gave him the brief like a preacher giving confession. Don't redline her below 5,000. Keep the throttle smooth and climb. And if she starts talking back, just listen. Morales took off at sunrise. The air shimmered over the Mediterranean. Within minutes, the ground crew's radios exploded with chatter. Control, this is Eagle 2. Climb rate's insane. Jesus, she's still climbing. At 20,000 feet, Morales pushed the throttle. The patched hybrid engine screamed and the altimeter spun past limits no stock Mustang had ever reached. 25,000, 27,000, 29,000 feet. Then came the shock. 440 mph in level flight. The original P-51D, straight from the factory, topped out around 437 mph with perfect parts. Cutter's Junkyard mix had beaten it. Morales couldn't believe it. She's smoother than a clean build, he radioed down. Feels lighter, faster. Hell, I think she's got a pulse. On the ground, the engineers crowded around the monitor, jaws open. Cutter stood silent, arms crossed, a cigarette burning down to the filter. What the hell did you do to that engine? Holloway asked. Cutter shrugged. I just let her breathe. In reality, his fix had done more than anyone realized. The mismatched intake manifold, scavenged from 3 different fighters, created a Venturi effect that boosted airflow efficiency by 12%. His improvised exhaust flanges reduced back pressure, increasing thrust. Even the uneven aluminum skin acted like micro-spoilers, stabilizing airflow across the fuselage. It wasn't luck, it was feel. The kind of mechanical intuition no manual could teach. By the time Morales landed, Second Chances was more than a test flight. She was proof. Proof that the rules weren't gospel and that ingenuity could outfly perfection. When he climbed out, Morales pulled off his helmet and said, Sir, she doesn't fly like a Mustang. She flies like something trying to break heaven. Holloway turned to Cutter. You realize you've built an experimental aircraft in the middle of a war zone? Yeah, Cutter replied, and it works. But the truth was more complicated. His miracle machine had also made him a target. Reports of his unauthorized rebuild reached command. Washington wanted answers. Inspectors were on their way. Cutter knew what that meant. Paperwork, interrogation, maybe even prison. He didn't care. He'd already seen what mattered. A plane that should have died had just flown faster than anything in Europe. That wasn't defiance. That was evolution. He stubbed out his cigarette, looked at the hangar full of broken machines, and said quietly, Guess it's time to fix a few more ghosts. By the time the inspectors arrived, the base was buzzing like a hornet's nest. The brass sent 2 men from right field, one an engineer, the other a major with a clipboard and a permanent scowl. They found Cutter under the wing of another wreck, wrench in hand, cigarette dangling. Sergeant Cutter, the major barked, we're here to discuss an unauthorized aircraft modification conducted under your supervision. Cutter didn't even look up. If it flew, it wasn't unauthorized. It was successful. The engineer, a young man with round glasses, smirked despite himself. We heard about the climb rate. 4,800 feet per minute? That can't be right. Cutter stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and said, Wasn't right, but it was real. They ordered a retest under official observation. Morales was grounded. This time, they wanted a qualified evaluator from the inspection team to fly it. Cutter didn't argue. He just asked for one condition. If he crashes her, I get to say I told you so before you court-martial me. The next morning, Second Chances stood on the runway again, sunlight catching every patch and weld. The inspector climbed in, nervous. Cutter leaned on the wing. Treat her gentle. She's got trust issues. Engines roared. The Mustang rolled, lifted. Smooth, effortless. Then it began to climb. At 10,000 feet, the ground crew's instruments went crazy. The altimeter spiked. The airspeed gauge hit 445, then 450, then 457 mph. No stock Mustang had ever reached that, not even the North American test prototypes. The inspector's voice came through the radio, thin with disbelief. "She's accelerating in climb. Repeat, accelerating uphill." Cutter grinned. "Told you so." At 25,000 feet, the Mustang hit the jet stream, and something strange happened. The airflow around the patched fuselage began to oscillate, reducing drag just enough to push the limits. 458, 462, 465 RP. The inspector didn't know it yet, but he was flying the fastest prop-driven aircraft in the European theater. Then came the sound, a high-pitched whine like a jet engine winding up. The hybrid exhaust system, warped and mismatched, was resonating at a perfect harmonic frequency, creating a pseudo-thrust effect. The mechanic's Frankenstein had become an accidental supercharger. When the inspector landed, he climbed out of the cockpit, pale and shaking. "That shouldn't have worked," he whispered. Cutter shrugged. "Neither should gravity. But here we are." The right field engineer spent hours examining the plane. He found nothing that fit military schematics. Every modification violated standards. Every fix defied logic. Yet every system worked. His report read like blasphemy. "Unregulated but functionally superior. Suggest further study. Possible prototype basis." The major wasn't impressed. "You'll never get clearance to replicate this. It's chaos in aluminum form." Cutter smiled faintly. "Chaos won this war, Major." The next week, Second Chances flew escort over northern Italy, officially classified as field-tested experimental. It downed 2 German interceptors and returned home without a scratch. By then, Cutter didn't need credit. He just stood on the tarmac, looking at the sky, watching his Junkyard miracle vanish into the clouds. He whispered, "Keep flying, girl." Behind him, the major shook his head. "You realize what you've done, Sergeant?" "Yeah," Cutter said, lighting another cigarette. "I just made your job harder." And as Second Chances disappeared over the horizon, one thing became clear. Sometimes the future isn't built in factories or labs. Sometimes it's hammered together by a man who refuses to let dead machines stay dead. The war didn't wait for experiments, and neither did fate. 2 weeks after Cutter's outlaw rebuild, a bomber group flying out of Corsica radioed for help. They'd been ambushed by a swarm of German interceptors over the Ligurian Sea, FW-190s and Me-109s diving from altitude like hawks. All available Mustangs were scrambled. Among them, Second Chances. Morales was back in the cockpit, helmet crooked, grin reckless. Before takeoff, he found Cutter on the tarmac. "You sure she's ready for a fight this time?" Cutter spat in the dirt. "She was born in one." The sky over the sea was chaos. Smoke trails, fire, and falling wrecks. Morales rolled in from 20,000 feet, his hybrid Mustang screaming. A 190 appeared dead ahead, diving through a bomber formation. Morales hit full throttle. And then the impossible happened. The patched-together plane, built from 3 wrecks and a stolen radiator, started gaining on the German fighter, one of the fastest in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. "Jesus Christ," Morales radioed. "I'm climbing and still catching him." Cutter's mods had turned the Mustang into a monster. The uneven airflow from his custom intake was feeding the supercharger beyond factory limits. Every second of boost pushed more power into the Merlin engine, and the patched skin, warped and uneven, created just enough turbulence to stabilize high-speed airflow. The altimeter read 28,000 feet. The speed gauge, 460, 470, 480 mph. The German pilot looked back and saw something he couldn't believe. An American Mustang with mismatched panels closing in on his tail. He broke right, diving toward the cloud layer. Morales followed. Tracer fire ripped through the sky. Morales squeezed the trigger. and the 50 cals answered in kind. 4 bursts, 2 hits, 1 explosion. The FW-190 shattered mid-air, its wreckage tumbling into the sea. Another bogey appeared behind him. Morales jerked the stick, kicking into a turn so tight the G-force blurred his vision. The Mustang groaned, wings flexing, rivets screaming. But she held. Second Chances was supposed to be a ghost. Now she was the predator. Over the radio, a British pilot gasped, "Bloody hell. That thing's not even in the books." By the end of the engagement, Morales had downed 2 fighters, damaged another, and escorted the bombers home safely. When he landed, his fuel was near zero, his plane riddled with fresh holes, but still flying straight. Cutter was waiting, arms crossed, eyes squinting against the sun. "How's she feel?" Morales grinned. "Like she knows she shouldn't be alive." The ground crew gathered, touching the patched skin like pilgrims at a shrine. They'd seen plenty of Mustangs, but nothing like this. The Frankenstein machine that shouldn't have left the ground had just outrun the Luftwaffe's best. Later that night, Holloway entered the hangar quietly. Cutter was sitting beneath the wing, smoking in silence. "You know," the major said, "the brass will never approve this. They'll deny it ever happened." Cutter nodded. "That's fine. The sky knows." He gestured upward, to the dark where the sound of distant engines still echoed. "That's all that matters." In his notebook, he'd written one final line, the only record he ever kept. "Speed is the reward for faith in broken things." From that day, pilots began whispering about a myth. A Mustang built from scrap, faster than factory, climbing higher than jets. And though Cutter never got a medal, the legend of Second Chances spread across the airfields like wildfire. A myth, born from madness, welded by defiance, and proven by fire. Victory in Europe came not long after that flight, but peace didn't bring glory. It brought questions. Within weeks, officers from Army Air Forces headquarters arrived on the base, armed with orders, briefcases, and suspicion. They weren't looking for heroes. They were looking for violations. Cutter's name topped the list. When they found Second Chances, she was parked at the edge of the airstrip, sun-bleached and battle-scarred. One inspector, a man from Washington with shoes too clean for the dust, pointed at her wing and said, "That thing shouldn't have been in the air. You understand you broke military code, Sergeant?" Cutter didn't flinch. "Yeah," he said. "But she flew, didn't she?" The officer sighed, flipping through his clipboard. "You risked government property, endangered pilots, and tampered with an aircraft engine outside of protocol." Cutter leaned closer. "Sir, if you're looking for protocol, you won't find it in a war zone." The engineer beside the officer knelt to inspect Cutter's welds, and stopped. His voice softened. "My God, look at this. These stress points shouldn't even hold." "But they did." Cutter nodded. "She didn't read your rules, so she didn't know she was supposed to fail." They grounded the plane, of course, stripped her for study. Her engine was shipped to Wright Field for testing. Weeks later, engineers confirmed the impossible. The patched hybrid Mustang had achieved power output 14% above any recorded Merlin engine. But the report, stamped confidential, disappeared into a file drawer, never to see daylight. The war was over, and nobody wanted a story about a rule-breaking grease monkey outsmarting the system. One night, Morales found Cutter sitting alone by the now empty hangar. He held a flask in one hand, his hands still black with oil. "They're going to bury it, aren't they?" Morales said. Cutter shrugged. "Let 'em. The sky doesn't care about paperwork." "What'll you do now?" Cutter smiled faintly. "Same thing I always do. Fix broken things." When he left the base, he didn't take medals or orders. Just a small piece of aluminum cut from Second Chance's wing, folded into his pocket like a talisman. Back home, he opened a garage in Texas, fixing tractors and trucks for farmers who couldn't afford the official shops. He never talked about the war, never mentioned the Mustang that outran the Luftwaffe. But sometimes, when the wind blew just right, neighbors swore they could hear an engine, a faint, high-pitched whine like a ghost still flying, and in his journal, found years later after his death, a single line was scrawled across the final page. "They said I built chaos. I built freedom." That was Cutter's legacy. Not a medal, not a headline, but a truth buried beneath the noise of history. The future wasn't engineered by perfection. It was hammered together by men who refused to quit. Years later, when jet engines ruled the skies and propellers became museum pieces, a young Air Force engineer stumbled across a dusty file labeled Unverified Field Modifications, P-51 Mustang, 1944. Inside were faded photographs, a patchwork plane with mismatched panels, crude welds, and the words "second chances" scrawled across her nose. There were no commendations, no signatures, just one note scribbled in pencil. Experimental performance confirmed, unrepeatable by regulation. The engineer frowned, then whispered what every dreamer eventually learns. Sometimes the rules hold you down harder than gravity. He took the report home, studied it, and realized something uncanny. Cutter's chaotic modifications anticipated future aerodynamics. His handmade intake geometry matched the principles later used in the North American F-86 Saber's variable Venturi design. His exhaust resonator? Nearly identical to the afterburner pulse harmonics that powered early U.S. jets. The man who'd welded scrap together in a war zone had accidentally glimpsed the next century. In the decades that followed, no one officially mentioned Sergeant Cutter. The manuals he defied became the foundation for the modern maintenance corps. His type, the improvisers, the mechanics who trusted feel over formula, faded into legend. But for the pilots who lived through those years, his story never died. They passed it down in hangars and bars, whispered like a secret prayer to the gods of machines. They called him the Junkyard Prophet. Every time a jet mechanic made a temporary fix that saved a mission. Every time a pilot ignored protocol and trusted instinct. Cutter's ghost smiled somewhere in the metal. Because in the end, wars aren't won by perfect machines. They're won by the imperfect men who keep them alive. Out there in the Texas plains, where the wind howls through broken fences and old tractors rust under the sun, there's still a rumor that if you listen close enough, you can hear a single engine roar echoing through the dust. A Mustang made from ruins, climbing into eternity. And somewhere between the earth and the sky, Cutter's voice still lingers, gravel and smoke. Don't wait for permission, just make it fly.